everyone, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today I am going to talk a little bit about my journey as an artist and show you a look at the process of how I did this oil painting of cherries. If you happen to see my last vlog, I talked a little bit about how sort of disappointed I was in myself that I hadn't been actually making art. Making art is one of the things that makes me the happiest, and I hadn't been doing it like I had promised myself I was going to at the beginning of the year. So I decided to listen to myself and do a painting. So in the beginning, you could see me prepping my panel. It is an 8" by 8" canvas panel from Cherries, which is an art store in Canada. And I have coated it a couple times with gesso. I am not a fan of canvas texture very much, so I always put quite a few coats of gesso and I sand in between to get them nice and smooth, and then I sand again at the end. So there is just a tiny bit of texture still, but it is considerably smoother than what it is straight from the store, and I like that kind of a surface better. I also decided that to help me keep this feeling low pressure, I would just use my little tabletop easel and sit at my little desk here instead of going over to the big, artist easel, because then if you're sitting at the big easel, then you have to make great art because it's the grown-up easel. And I thought if I just pulled out my little portable one and sat at my desk right in front of my window, it would feel a little bit more like I was doodling, even though it's not really a doodle. To try to keep it sort of low pressure, I decided to just do a Skillshare course, not sponsored. But in this course, the instructor provided a reference image, which came from Unsplash. So I didn't have to worry about what I was going to paint. And he dictated the proportions, the size, and so I didn't have to worry about that. All I had to do was actually just sit and paint and pay attention to what I was painting. Now, I didn't do a sketch like with pencil or anything under this, which is a first for me. Pretty much every painting I have ever done before has a pretty accurate sketch underneath it. And with trying to loosen up and get a more expressionistic feeling in my paintings, I decided I would do exactly what the instructor was doing, and that was just to sketch out the basic position and shapes of the object I was painting with a little bit of the background color. So I was really just using quick little dashy strokes, trying to match the angles that the cherries were at in the reference photo and the sizes. And then I just used some paper towel and I think at some point in time Q-tips to wipe out the marks that I didn't like. And I just kept doing that, sketch and wipe out, until I got a good shape. And then I just started to paint the background around those objects. So even though the background of this reference piece is white, the instructor had made his sort of like a beigeish color. And so I did the same thing, mixed up a bit of beige. Also in the reference photo, there is no distinguished horizon line, and he put a horizon line in his, so I did in mine as well. And it was just to help me think about my cherries actually sitting on a surface. And so in the foreground, I used warmer and lighter tones of paint. And then in the background, I used some cooler and darker tones to just sort of give it that feeling of depth. I also learned while watching this, what I would have done in the past is paint the whole background and then try to say paint shadows on top of that. So I learned that it's easier to paint around everything, including the shadows, so that you just have dry canvas and go in with your shadow colors afterwards. And this was much easier than anything I've tried to do in the past. So there's my first lesson learned following this course. Starting out this painting, I was pretty nervous, but I was determined to get all the way through it. This painting technique is called alla prima, which is, it's like a wet and wet painting all in one sitting. So no glazes or waiting for layers to dry, you just sit down and paint the whole thing. When I first started actually painting the cherries, I was pretty nervous, but I started just with a few, what I thought at the time was my darkest tone. You will see this changes again later when I realized that I actually hadn't gone dark enough, but it's part of the learning process. I had to go down to a smaller brush size. The instructor had recommended to use the bigger size brush, like the one that I painted the whole background in, for pretty much all of this initial blocking in, but I just couldn't. I think, I mean, maybe I should have pushed myself to do it anyways. I just felt like I was a bull in a china shop making a big huge mess with this large chunky brush, but it could be just that I am not practiced enough with a large brush. So I moved down to this smaller one and felt a little bit more comfortable with it. And again, I just went back to looking back and forth from my painting to my reference image and really taking my time and trying to identify, you know, I see a dark shape here, so paint dark shape, and worked around with my dark shape. And then, you know, I would mix up a maybe brighter or warmer tone, and you know, I see a warmer color here, I will put a warmer color here, back and forth. And this is how I pretty much built the entire painting. So as I expected, there were a few things that I struggled with trying to get through this painting. The first one was the reflections in the cherries, the brighter reflections of the white floor that they were sitting on, reflecting back up into their shiny surface. I did go over these a few times. There is actually, at one point in time, I actually wiped out a bunch of the paint and sort of started over again because I just wasn't happy and couldn't figure out why I wasn't happy with it. And this is the second thing, the second lesson I think I took away from doing this practice piece was in oil paints anyways, if you're unhappy with something, just wipe it out. Coming from mostly painting in watercolors in my life and experimenting a little bit with acrylics, which I don't like, by the way, but anyways, with watercolors, you can't just wipe it out. When you put your paint down, it's down. There are some fixes to a degree if you do make a mistake, but you sure can't just wipe out something and paint it again. So the first few times that I have painted with oil paints, I would get to a point where I didn't like it and would just leave it for a few days or a week or so to let it dry so I could paint on top of it. I don't know why it didn't occur to me sooner that I could just wipe it off and do it again, and that I didn't have to wait days to come back to it. But now I know. The next thing that I struggled with was the shadows. There were a couple of things that I struggled with this, and the first one, which is obvious now as I'm watching this recording, but wasn't immediately obvious, was that I had the shadows far too dark. And again, this is something that could be a little subjective. You could push this shadow lighter or darker depending on what you prefer, but for me it was too dark. And it took me a little bit to figure out that it was too dark, for one, and then it took me a little bit to figure out how to fix it. You will see me struggling here. I will decide to try to drag some of the lighter paint in to make it lighter, and then you see me struggling with, it's just learning a new medium, right? And so as soon as you touch your paintbrush down to wet paint, it will pick up some of the paint that was on the panel. So I would paint from white to dark, but then when I lift my brush up, I'd have dark on the brush and forget about that, lay it back down into the lights and have a smudge of dark there. So it took me a little bit to get used to, make a stroke, wipe off my brush, make a stroke, wipe off my brush. That's another thing that I learned during the course of this particular painting, is wipe your brush off regularly, particularly if you're trying to go between two different colors or tones. Again, this comes back to why I decided to do a course where the subject matter and the size and all that other stuff was already dictated for me, because it gave me a little less to think about. I could really focus on these problems, like how to deal with wet paint and, how to deal with mistakes. And I didn't have to worry about anything else, just those things. So I think doing courses or paint with me's or walkthroughs are a really good idea when you're first starting out. I had to let go of the idea that anything I paint could be sold for money, because, that's not realistic. This painting probably hang on my wall till the day I die. So that's okay. I did have to walk away for a couple of hours, not only because my dog demanded my attention, and so did my stomach, but I found that I just sort of felt a little bit like I was just pushing the same paint around and not actually fixing anything or getting to where I wanted to be. And I did get a little frustrated with it. I pulled out my palette knife and started to just add some swatches of texture and stuff in the background and blend a little bit of it over the cherries and just mess it up a little bit. And then when I came back and looked at it again, the first thing I realized that my painting was missing was contrast. So I mixed up a much darker tone of the paint, almost like a deep purple even, and ended up putting that in the shadows. And that really helped me bring things together. It even helped me decide on better colors for the reflections in the front of the cherries. It's amazing what a little thing like contrast will fix in a painting or in an image. So one of the reasons I decided to do this course in particular was it was titled Loose Impressionistic Painting. And this is something I am trying to incorporate more of into my artwork. I struggle a lot with the anxiety of perfectionism, and I am pretty sure I am not alone in this. Not even just for artists, but the idea of perfectionism it's subject to each individual person. So one person may look at a highly detailed and refined, hyper-realistic painting and think, oh my God, I thought that was a photo. This is the perfect painting. Other people might look at something very abstract with just maybe some shapes and colors and texture that invokes a feeling to them and think, oh my God, this is a perfect painting. So who is to say what is perfect? Only you can. So trying to strive for what you think other people will perceive as perfect is very, very flawed and very counterproductive to growing as an artist. And I think I am finally old enough or far enough along in my life that I can realize this, or that I can understand this. And for me, perfectionism, or the anxiety of perfectionism, was actually causing me to not make any art at all, which is obviously counterproductive to growing as an artist, because you cannot grow if you are not making anything. And it also led my pieces to be very methodical, very tightly planned out, very detailed. I would spend a lot of time on under sketches and measurements and making sure everything was perfect. And I would get caught up in details and trying to make everything crisp and clean and perfect. And it was leading to paintings that looked very stiff and, in my opinion, very amateur, which is, I mean, of course, I'm an amateur painter, so of course they're going to look amateur, but it is something that I am trying to move away from. And so this course I thought would be sort of a good step in the right direction. If you've made it this far and you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. One thing I did do different from the instructor is he painted all his cherries with pretty much the same colors, but the one thing that I could not get past visually was that that one cherry on the right in the front had a much more warmer, orangier, brighter hue to it. So I actually changed the hue a little bit and added some yellows to my red mixes that I had in there and started trying to get that same bright orangey glow that I saw in the photo. I don't think it's quite as bright, but I like it. Played around a little bit with the highlights. I started out safe by making them not super white, which I think it's a good idea not to make all your highlights super white anyways, because most things when you look at them, when you think the highlight is white, it's not actually white. It's just a very bright version of whatever the color is underneath it. Although, of course, the shinier the object, the sharper the contrast on your highlight will be. So I do end up adding some really bright whites, but again, I try to keep the solid bright white, the white, bright white, just to the center of the highlights. And the other white, I sort of play with it and tap it in and try to soften it up a little bit with the colors that are already on it around it, which is, again, that's something that you can do in oil paints that you can't do in like watercolor, for instance. You would have to approach this completely differently in watercolor. One of the final things that I struggled with was the stems a little bit, and again, it was just getting used to trying to paint against another wet paint. So, you know, I made some smudges and some mistakes, and I'd go back in and paint the background around them, and it's just one of those learning things, and sort of like sculpting, you know, with clay. You take a little off, you add a little on. That's kind of what it was like while I was trying to get the shapes of them right. And this again could have been an area where I could have been maybe a little bit looser and expressive, maybe just suggesting at the stems, not making them so defined if you're trying to get a looser abstract look to your paintings, but it's that urge in me to try to represent every little detail accurately that kept me fiddling with these stems. Another thing that helps, but is obviously not necessary, I found I'm a little bit ambidextrous, which means that I can also paint to a degree with my left hand, and that really helped me getting around to certain angles and sides of things. Again, not necessary. I simply could have picked up my panel and turned it around. The last little bits of details I did were trying to add some color variation and some highlights and whatnot to the stem. I didn't want to go too brightly colored with them. I know that in the reference photo they're considerably greener and brighter, but I really wanted the red of the cherries to pop, and I just wanted these to be pretty desaturated. Although they are quite dark, they could have been maybe a little bit lighter, but I'm okay with them. I feel like I put the highlights on the wrong parts. I wasn't really paying attention when I was painting them, or maybe, I'm not sure. I just wasn't paying attention to my light source, and I think that some of the highlights could have been painted in different areas. But, again, another lesson learned. And again, like any other time that I try these sorts of things, I do end up really having fun doing them. And it's just another reminder to myself and to you, if you're watching this, that, try these things. Try something new, try something different, try something the way somebody else has to do it exactly. You learn a lot that way, and that's very important. I now understand in, a journey to become an artist. So I really hope that you enjoyed this. Maybe you learned a few things from some of my mistakes that you can take into your own paintings. Maybe I've inspired you to go find somebody's course and try it for yourself. Or maybe I've simply just inspired you to pull out some paint and put something on a canvas, which is really the most important part. So I forgot to turn on the camera and record while I was finishing it off and signing it, but here is the final result. Overall, I'm happy with it. It's obviously not an award-winning painting. That wasn't my goal. I just really wanted to practice with the medium and get to know my paints and my brushes, and to that degree, I believe this was very successful. It's not as loose and expressionistic as the instructor had his, but it is considerably looser than my old paintings and drawings. So to that degree, I believe that it was successful. So looking at the final piece, I do feel like I could have been looser still. I could have been more expressionistic, or abstracted a little bit more. But I think it's a step in the right direction. And so obviously, I think practice will make perfect. But for now, I think it's okay. But either way, I really hope you enjoyed it. And thanks for sticking around. So until the next video, I hope you have a great day, a great week, a great night, whatever. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.